For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council believed it had turned war into something clean, controlled, and civilized, and across the known galaxy every advanced species followed the same sacred rules. Warnings had to be sent before battle, fleets had to meet in marked combat zones, civilian systems were never to be touched first, and no side was allowed to strike outside the agreed borders of war. But on the day humanity stood before that great council for the first time as a full member race, many among the old powers already looked at Earth with quiet contempt, because humans were too new, too fast, too loud, and too hard to predict, and though Earth had only been in deep space for a few short decades, human trade ships were already crossing major routes, human colonies were appearing on cold moons and harsh frontier worlds, and human engineers kept building strange modular ships that could change purpose in weeks instead of years, which made the older empires uneasy, especially the war-minded powers who believed that only ancient bloodlines deserved to command fleets among the stars. In the Grand Council chamber, beneath a ceiling of living crystal that glowed with the flags of 1,000 species, the human delegation stood in simple dark uniforms instead of jeweled robes, and at their center was Ambassador Yuna, calm and sharp-eyed, with Commander Jizu and Admiral Day standing just behind her, while across from them sat High Marshal Varric of the Council, Defense Armada, Councillor Terrell of the Central Chamber, and a ring of alien leaders who had spent centuries making sure no younger race could rise too quickly. And when the final terms of the Galactic War Accord were presented, the chamber expected Earth to bow its head and sign like everyone else had. But Yuna did not sign, and the silence that followed was so deep even the air seemed to freeze. Councillor Terrell leaned forward and asked if humanity understood the honor being offered, and Yuna answered in a steady voice that Earth understood perfectly, that humans respected peace, respected alliances, and respected order, but they would not bind themselves to rules that assumed every enemy would behave with reason, because on Earth war had never been clean, and survival had never waited for permission. And a wave of low laughter spread through the chamber as many of the elder races took her words as the fear of a primitive species that did not yet understand true civilization. But Yuna did not lower her eyes, and when High Marshal Varric mocked her openly and asked if humans were too savage to follow proper law, she replied with the same calm tone that if Earth was ever attacked, humanity would answer in whatever way ensured its people survived, and that no paper written in a distant chamber would matter more than the lives of human civilians. And this time even more voices laughed, because to the council that sounded like an emotional threat from a species that had not yet learned its place. After that meeting, the council officially welcomed Earth into the galaxy, but unofficially it began moving pieces in the dark, because the old powers had decided humanity needed to be humbled before it grew too strong. And among those who pushed hardest was Varric, whose fleets had crushed rebellions and border wars for over 200 years. And he was deeply offended that a new race had dared stand before the chamber and refuse the ancient accord, so he convinced several allied members that Earth was a future danger, a species too unpredictable to be trusted, and soon restrictions began to fall on human trade. Inspection fleets started delaying Earth cargo, frontier stations reported harassment by patrol ships, and rumors spread through the stars that humans were unstable, violent, and unfit for galactic leadership. On Earth, leaders saw the pattern immediately, but instead of making angry speeches, they watched, waited, and quietly moved assets, while in orbit above Earth, hidden behind civilian traffic and supply lines, shipyards increased production without announcement, and deep inside military command rings, Admiral Day and Commander Jizu met with Fleet Captain Hannah and Intelligence Director Nari, reviewing maps of trade lanes, colony routes, and council fleet movement, and none of them were surprised, because humanity had expected this from the moment Yuna refused the accord, and Day simply said that if the council wanted a lesson, it would choose the time and place, but humanity would choose the outcome. Far from Earth, on a mining colony called Alio's Reach, a small but important human settlement built around ice extraction and fuel processing. Life still moved in the simple rhythm of frontier work. Families lived in pressurized domes, cargo pilots joked in docking bays, and children watched the stars through reinforced glass, believing the worst days of old Earth history were long behind them. And among the workers there was a young supervisor named Sora who had sent a message home only hours earlier saying business was good and the next convoy would arrive soon. But that convoy never came, because instead of freighters, 3 council patrol cruisers entered the system under the banner of legal inspection, and Alio's Reach, following galactic protocol, opened communication channels and granted approach access, expecting the usual delays and threats, But the lead cruiser demanded immediate seizure of all fuel reserves under emergency military authority, and when the station manager protested that the colony was civilian and neutral under council law, the alien commander answered that Earth's refusal to fully submit to the war accord had created a security risk, and before the station could even finish transmitting a distress call, the first shot hit the docking ring. What happened next spread across human space in broken, burning fragments. Because the patrol cruisers did not disable the colony or board it, they attacked it, tearing open habitat sections, igniting fuel lines, and blasting escape shuttles before they could clear the docks. And in less than 7 minutes Alio's Reach became a field of fire and metal drifting in the dark, with hundreds dead, including workers, families, and children who had never even seen Earth. While the patrol commander sent a cold report to the council claiming the colony had resisted lawful seizure and that force had been required. In the council chamber, some were uneasy, some shocked, but Varric dismissed the incident as unfortunate necessity, and he told the chamber that Earth would now understand the price of defiance, that humans would either come begging for arbitration or lash out blindly and expose their weakness, and many agreed, because for all their talk, humanity was still just one young species facing a galaxy of ancient powers. But on Earth, when the emergency transmissions finally arrived, there was no public screaming in the streets, no emotional demand for revenge broadcast across every channel, and no desperate plea to the council for justice. There was only silence, the kind of silence that feels unnatural because it is too complete. And in the war room beneath Earth's orbital defense network, Una watched the final images from Alio's Reach without blinking. Day stood with both hands behind his back like stone. Jizu clenched his jaw so hard it looked painful, and Hannah quietly listed the dead as if saying their names correctly was the only respect left to give them. And when the list ended, no one spoke for several long seconds until Una finally said that the council had made its choice, and Day answered that then Earth would make its own. Within the hour, encrypted orders moved through military and civilian networks hidden under ordinary traffic. Reserve officers were recalled, merchant captains received sealed directives, orbital tugs changed course, fuel depots opened military corridors, and factory lines that had been building transports and construction modules suddenly shifted to armor plating, missiles, and drone frames, while in shipyards around Luna, Mars, and the asteroid belt, great hulls that had been sleeping in darkness lit up one by one, and the workers who saw it happen understood at once what it meant, because humanity had not spent decades building flexible ships by accident, and it had not kept entire production chains dual use for efficiency alone. In the Council's outer intelligence web, analysts first noticed strange spikes in traffic near Earth, then sudden movement from mining tugs, cargo convoys, and repair docks, and at first they misread it as panic evacuation. But when the data sharpened, even veteran observers went pale, because every major human shipyard in the solar system had begun launching vessels at the same time, not dozens, but hundreds, warships sliding from hidden docks, carrier hulls breaking from shadowed stations, escort destroyers igniting drives, converted freighters arming missile racks, and old industrial ships shedding civilian shells to reveal reinforced combat frames beneath. While long-range arrays picked up formation codes too complex and too disciplined to be a frightened response, and back in the council chamber, as Varric prepared to announce Earth's inevitable surrender, a trembling aide rushed forward with live tactical projections showing wave after wave of human fleet signals rising from Earth orbit like a storm waking from sleep. And for the first time in that ancient hall, the laughter stopped, because the galaxy had expected anger, fear, or diplomacy. But what it saw instead was something far more dangerous. Humanity had answered the murder of its civilians not with words, but with total mobilization, and as the stars around Earth filled with the burn of engines and the dark silhouettes of ships built for a kind of war the Council had forgotten could exist, Ambassador Una looked once more at the silent image of ruined Alio's Reach and said in a voice colder than vacuum that the galaxy had wanted humans to learn their rules, but now it would learn humanity's, and across the void, every sensor station from the frontier to the inner worlds began reporting the same terrifying truth. Earth was going to war. When the first reports of Earth's full mobilization reached the inner systems of the Galactic Council, many leaders still refused to believe what they were seeing, because in their long history no young species had ever answered a frontier punishment strike with this level of speed, scale, and discipline. And in the high command chamber above the Council's capital world, High Marshal Varric stood before a field of shifting star maps while admirals, ministers, and intelligence officers argued over the meaning of the flood of human fleet signals pouring out of the solar system, with some calling it panic, some calling it theater, and others insisting it was only a desperate show meant to force negotiations. But Admiral Sorath, one of the few commanders in the chamber who had actually studied humanity instead of mocking it, watched the data in silence and felt a cold pressure building in his chest, because what he saw was not chaos, and it was not fear, it was structure hidden inside. Movement, a pattern buried beneath what looked like disorder, and when one of the younger officers laughed at the sight of mining barges and cargo haulers joining the human fleet list, Sorath quietly said that if the humans were willing to arm their industrial ships, then the Council had already made a mistake larger than anyone understood. Far from the chamber, Earth's skies were alive with motion, and across orbit above Earth, Luna, Mars, and the shipyards hidden among the asteroid belt. Countless vessels moved with terrifying purpose, but unlike the polished ceremonial fleets of the older races, the human force looked almost ugly, built from hard angles, dark armor, exposed weapon housings, and modular sections that could be replaced in days instead of years. And Admiral Day stood inside the command bridge of the flagship Resolute Dawn as tactical layers spread around him like a living machine. While Commander Jizu oversaw strike routing, Captain Hannah managed forward deployment groups, and Director Nari coordinated deep intelligence assets already moving ahead of the main fleet. And none of them wasted time on speeches, because human war planning had started the moment Alio's reach was destroyed, and the real work now was execution. All across human space, civilian life shifted without panic but with hard focus. Freight captains opened sealed wartime orders and altered course toward hidden supply depots. Asteroid miners released prefabricated armor plates from storage racks they had pretended were industrial reserve stock. Orbital repair crews stripped docking arms and converted them into point defense scaffolds. And factories that had spent years making habitat supports, engines, and agricultural machinery now turned out missile tubes, drone swarms, emergency reactor cores, and kinetic slugs, because unlike the Council species, humanity had never truly separated peace from preparation, and on Earth, the old lessons of history had been taught. Generation after generation, if war ever came from the stars, every hand, every machine, and every resource would matter. Varek, however, still believed the matter could be solved with one overwhelming demonstration. So he ordered the same punitive fleet that had broken Alio's reach to advance toward the outer human systems, reinforced by a larger attack group led by the battle carrier Iron Claw and 6 heavy cruisers, expecting to draw the humans into a formal defensive line near Mars or the lunar shield platforms, where Council firepower and tradition would crush them in open space. But the first surprise came before his fleet had even crossed the first major transit lane, because a major fuel reserve moon used by Council patrols near the frontier suddenly erupted in a white sphere of silent fire. And by the time sensors understood what had happened, the moon's depots, dock rings, and escort craft were already gone, reduced to expanding debris and molten fragments, while nearby arrays picked up no large human fleet at all, only the fading signatures of 3 tiny drive flares that vanished into the dark. The news struck the Council chamber like a slap, and before the officers could even finish the first damage estimate, a second report came in from a long-range communications relay deep in a nearby sector, a relay that linked 3 Council fleet routes and 2 command networks, and it had not simply been attacked, it had been surgically erased, with its sensor dishes severed, its core power cut, and its backup transmitters destroyed by precision kinetic impacts from extreme range, leaving the whole region blind and confused. And now the chamber's laughter was gone, because this was not random anger, it was systematic dismantling. Aboard the Resolute Dawn, Day listened to the battle updates with the same cold expression he wore when reading weather reports, and Jizu, standing over a layered tactical map, reported that the first wave of long-range disruption had succeeded beyond forecast, with 7% of Council forward logistics damaged and local command cohesion already dropping. While Hannah noted that the enemy was still searching for the main human battle line near Earth. And Day answered simply that was exactly where they should keep looking, because the Council still believed war was a stage play with a front and a center, but humans had learned on Earth that the best place to fight was where the enemy thought nothing important could happen. That truth soon became even more painful for the Council when scattered human task groups began appearing across multiple systems at once, not in glorious massed formations, but as small, fast, independent strike packs made of mixed ships, 2 corvettes here, a converted or hauler there, a stealth frigate paired with armed drone tenders somewhere else, and each group hit a different nerve. Fuel convoys vanished, jump beacons were sabotaged, supply barges were turned into wrecks, and 2. Council shipyards reported internal explosions after accepting what they believed were damaged civilian freighters asking for emergency docking, only to discover too late that the ships were empty decoys packed with automated breaching charges and signal jamming drones. And every time the Council tried to respond, the humans were already gone, leaving behind nothing but debris, confusion, and broken schedules. In the Council chamber, Varek raged that these were acts of piracy and dishonor, that the humans were violating every law of civilized conflict, but Soreth spoke more boldly now and warned that the humans were not fighting for prestige. They were fighting to break the Council's ability to think, move, and coordinate, and if that process continued, then the size of the Council fleet would stop mattering. Yet Varek dismissed him again and declared that once the main attack force reached the outer human system, the enemy would be forced into a proper engagement. But even as he spoke, another report arrived, this one from a Council battle group escorting a long fuel convoy, and the message was full of static, broken voices, and flashes of sensor data showing what looked at first like a random meteor stream. But those rocks were moving wrong, changing course, correcting angle, and then blooming with engine signatures as armored human strike pods detached from the debris, hit the convoy at close range, and launched saturation missiles directly into the tank clusters, turning the convoy into a chain of explosions so violent that 3 escort destroyers lost shields and spun helplessly into the burning wreck field, while the surviving commander's final transmission carried a line that spread through the military like poison. They were hiding inside the rocks. On Earth, people watched only fragments of the war, because military sensors kept much hidden, but enough leaked through to change the mood of the planet from grief into hard resolve. And at memorial sites for Aelio's Reach, workers, families, and veterans gathered in silence beneath holograms of the dead, while above them, fleets kept launching without pause, and among the officers moving between command stations was Yuna, no longer acting only as a diplomat, but as the calm political voice making sure the worlds of humanity stayed united. And when some younger ministers asked if these strikes were too extreme, she answered that Aelio's Reach had been a civilian colony, and the Council had made the first choice, and now Earth's only duty was to make sure no one ever believed they could do such a thing again. As the days passed, the gap between Council expectations and battlefield reality grew wider and more dangerous, because their doctrine demanded fleets remain concentrated, protected, and visible, while human doctrine turned every isolated ship, every dark moon, every shipping lane, and every forgotten rock into a possible threat. And the more Varek pushed his fleets forward in large formations, the easier they became to predict, while the more the humans spread out, the harder they became to kill. And even when Council scouts finally located what looked like a major human concentration near the edge of the Mars defense sphere, Varek eagerly ordered a fast attack wing to strike, hoping for the decisive clash he had wanted from the beginning. But the target was a trap, a false fleet built from decoy drives, hollow hull shells, and signal amplifiers, and when the Council attack wing committed to the assault, hidden human rail platforms buried inside a nearby asteroid cluster opened fire. From impossible range, punching through cruiser armor with tungsten slugs moving so fast the impacts looked like sudden holes appearing in reality. And by the time the surviving Council ships tried to turn away, a second layer of cloaked missile drones rose from the shadow of the rocks and finished the rest, leaving only one crippled vessel to limp back with a shattered hull and a crew that could barely explain what had happened. Now even the common citizens of the inner worlds were hearing whispers, because for the first time in centuries the Council fleets looked vulnerable, and the word human was being spoken less as an insult and more as a warning. Aboard the Iron Claw, the lead carrier of the Council's punitive force, officers grew tense as their supply chain began failing in real time. Escorts arrived late or not at all, navigation beacons flickered with false data, and entire route packages had to be recalculated every few hours because some unseen human hand kept cutting the lines that held the fleet together. And when its commander finally prepared a direct transmission demanding the human fleet reveal itself and face lawful battle, the signal returned not from a capital ship, not from Earth Command, but from a small, battered-looking relay drone drifting in open space, and as the bridge crew stared, the drone activated a clean human voice that filled the chamber in simple, steady words, a voice everyone on the ship would remember for the rest of their lives. Because it was Admiral Day himself, and he did not shout, threaten, or boast, he only said, "You wanted war by your rules. We declined," and the moment the message ended, The relay drone exploded into a blinding pulse that overloaded the Iron Claw's forward sensors. While at that exact same second, alarms screamed across the fleet as hidden human strike groups emerged from cold dark space on 3 separate vectors, and the first real storm of human war crashed down on them. The first real storm of human war hit the Council fleet so fast and from so many angles that for several long seconds the bridge crews of the Iron Claw and its escort ships could not even understand what they were looking at, because the clean battle lines they had trained for simply did not exist, and instead of a noble enemy fleet rising ahead in formation, the darkness around them erupted with streaks of missiles, ghost-like sensor echoes, false targets, and sudden railgun flashes from distances so extreme that impacts landed before warnings could fully process. And on the bridge of the Iron Claw, the carrier's commander shouted for formation integrity, shield rotation, and counterswarm screens. But the human attack had already been built to break those exact responses, with Captain Hannah's forward strike groups rushing in first not to destroy the biggest ships immediately, but to blind them, confuse them, and force them to fire at the wrong things, while dozens of small human corvettes released clouds of cheap drone decoys that copied the signatures of heavy cruisers, carriers, and missile frigates, causing Council gunners to waste their opening salvos on targets that vanished in sparks and static, and just behind that first wave, Commander Jizu led the real knife thrust through the center, using fast destroyers with angled hulls and heat-dampened plating to slip between the panic tracking nets, hammering the escort line with coordinated missile bursts that punched through weakened shield sectors already strained by false contacts and sensor interference. From the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Admiral Day watched the battle unfold in layered silence, his voice calm as he issued short, precise orders to each task group, and beside him Yuna stood with her hands folded behind her back, not as a warrior but as the witness to what the Council had forced into existence, while Director Nari monitored signal warfare across a dozen systems at once, smiling faintly only when the enemy's command channels began collapsing exactly on schedule, because even as the Iron Claw's fleet fought for survival, human infiltrator drones hidden in old debris fields and abandoned navigation buoys were already flooding Council comm bands with ghost orders, false retreat vectors, and scrambled recognition codes, making ships hesitate at the worst possible moment. Aboard the Iron Claw, officers screamed that friendly ships were crossing fire lanes, escorts were breaking formation, and at least 3 cruisers had turned the wrong direction after receiving what they believed were emergency command updates. And then the second wave struck, not from ahead but from below the fleet's plane, where no proper enemy should have been because the Council considered that vector tactically poor for a major attack. Yet the humans had hidden long-range rail platforms inside shattered asteroid fragments days earlier, and now those buried weapons came alive, firing tungsten slugs that crossed the void like invisible spears, punching through the belly armor of 2 destroyers and opening the side of a cruiser so violently that half its engine spine blew into space in a ring of flame and metal, while fragments of the broken ship spun outward and slammed into nearby escorts, turning wreckage itself into secondary weapons, something that horrified the Council crews because to them battlefield debris was a hazard to avoid, but to humans it was simply another tool. Soreth, watching from the Council command chamber light years away through delayed tactical feeds, felt the weight of disaster settle over him, because the reports coming in were no longer isolated setbacks. They were proof that the entire logic of the Council's military order was failing, and when Varric roared that the fleet must hold position and crush the enemy through superior tonnage, Soreth snapped back harder than he ever had before, saying that there was no single enemy line to crush, no center to break, no honorable contest to win, because the humans were fighting the fleet like surgeons cutting nerves, not like soldiers seeking applause, but Varric, proud and furious, ordered all available ships in the region to converge and force the humans into a decisive engagement near the Nebula Corridor, a narrow passage between ion storms and dense mineral clouds that had long been marked as a dangerous but manageable transit lane. Day had expected that move before the order was even issued, and he approved it with a single nod, because the Nebula Corridor was exactly where he wanted the next lesson to begin, and as the battered remains of the Council punitive force regrouped and called for reinforcements, human scouts let themselves be seen at the corridor's edge, darting in and out of sensor range like nervous prey, with just enough visible engine burn to look like a retreating force trying to escape toward Mars. And Varric took the bait at once, ordering his main pursuit wing into the corridor with the confidence of a hunter who believed the enemy was finally breaking. But Captain Hannah had spent the last 2 days turning that corridor into a grave, seeding its outer edges with silent mines wrapped in dust, tucking sensor-killer drones into cold gas pockets, anchoring decoy beacons to drifting rocks, and placing remote kinetic launchers inside dead or chunks that looked like nothing more than natural debris. When the first Council ships entered the corridor, their long-range scans were already degraded by the ion haze, and their commanders assumed the patchy readings were natural interference. But then one cruiser vanished in a white flash as a mine latched onto its shield emitter and detonated from inside the field, causing a chain failure that left the ship exposed for less than a second, long enough for 3 human missiles to slam into its reactor section. And then the corridor exploded into chaos as false human fleet signatures appeared on every side, some above, some behind, some impossibly deep inside the nebula. And the Council captains reacted exactly as human models predicted, breaking formation to chase what they thought were openings, only to run into delayed mines, rail strikes, and ambush corvettes waiting in the haze. Jizu led the most brutal part of the trap personally, driving his destroyer Spear of Dawn through a blind pocket in the nebula with engines cut low and hull lights dead, then reigniting at point-blank range beside a heavy Council cruiser that had drifted away from its escorts, and before the alien crew could fully rotate shields, the Spear of Dawn emptied its side launchers in a full missile bloom, punching through the cruiser's weakened flank and leaving it spinning, crippled but not destroyed, because Jizu wanted it intact long enough for the next phase, and seconds later human boarding pods shot out like bullets, slamming into the broken hull, cutting through armor, and pouring Marines into the corridors, not to capture prisoners first, but to seize tactical systems, download battle data, and repurpose anything useful before the ship died. That detail spread terror through the Council survivors, because the humans were not just winning battles, they were learning during them, tearing apart enemy technology in real time, adapting frequencies, shield harmonics, and weapon timings before the fight was even over. And one alien officer who survived a boarding action later described the sight of a human team dragging a still-smoking targeting core down a corridor while gunfire echoed around them, as if the middle of battle was simply another workshop to them. Deeper in the corridor, one of the Council's proudest flagships, the Radiant Claw, attempted to restore order by forming a defensive wall with 2 battleships and ordering all remaining ships to rally on its beacon. But Day had been waiting for exactly such a move, and from the far edge of the nebula, the Resolute Dawn finally entered the battle openly, its dark hull gliding through ion mist like a shadow made solid, followed by long-range sniper ships that had held fire until now, and the moment the Radiant Claw locked onto the human flagship, Day ordered a maneuver so cold and brutal that even some human officers went silent, because a damaged but still functional support frigate, already evacuated and under remote control, was pushed straight toward the Radiant Claw's shield face at full burn, broadcasting emergency surrender signals on every open channel, and the alien flagship hesitated for the smallest fraction of time, enough for its gunners to pause and its shield orientation to adjust, expecting a harmless wreck or a possible surrender trap, and that hesitation killed it, because the empty frigate's core detonated against the shield in a focused overload blast, collapsing the forward layer for just 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds every hidden human sniper ship fired at once, rail slugs tearing through the exposed command deck, sensor crown, and reactor spine of the Radiant Claw in a storm of perfect impacts, shattering the flagship from within and sending half its glowing wreckage tumbling into the gas clouds like a dying star. Across the galaxy, delayed feeds of the battle spread in stunned silence, and for the first time in living memory the common people of dozens of worlds saw a Council war banner break in open combat, not through a glorious duel or overwhelming siege, but through deception, sacrifice, precision, and merciless adaptation, and many called it barbaric, but many more began asking a question none of the old powers wanted to hear. If the humans were barbarians, why were the civilized fleets the ones burning? After the destruction of the Radiant Claw, panic rippled through the remaining Council ships, some tried to retreat, some fired blindly into the nebula, and others turned on false signals that marked friendly craft as enemy, while human strike groups kept pressure on them without ever giving them a stable target, and by the time the corridor fell silent, wrecks drifted for thousands of kilometers, broken. Ships spun powerless in gas clouds, and human salvage drones were already moving among the debris like scavengers of war, pulling cores, data banks, and intact weapons from the dead before the enemy could even count its losses. Back in the Council chamber, Varek's fury had turned into something uglier, something close to fear, though he would never admit it, and when one trembling officer reported that the old fortress system of Kayla Prime, an inner defensive bastion guarding one of the major routes toward the capital, had detected dozens of fast-approaching signatures. Varric seized on the chance to prove the Council still held unbreakable ground, declaring that no human fleet could breach Kalis layered shields, orbital gun rings, and defense satellites. But the censor officer's voice shook as he corrected him, because the approaching signatures were too small, too numerous, and too erratic to be ships in proper formation. And when the tactical image magnified, the chamber fell silent once again, because what raced toward Kala Prime were not warships at all, but huge asteroids fitted with hidden drives, packed with armor, jammers, and warheads, turning the system's own deep space safety lanes into weapons. And as Admiral Day watched the same feed from the Resolute Dawn, he gave the next order with the same quiet tone he had used since Aelio's reach, while Una looked at the stars and understood that the galaxy still had not learned enough. Because the real war had only just begun as the engine-driven asteroids rushed toward Kala Prime like a storm of moving mountains, the Fortress Systems commanders first thought the human fleet had finally lost control and was throwing dead rock in blind desperation. But Admiral Soreth, watching from the Council command chamber, understood the truth a second before the first impact alarms began to scream. Because the asteroids were not simple projectiles, they were layered weapons, each one wrapped in jamming fields, hidden drone racks, armored decoy plates, and buried warheads, and when Kalis orbital guns opened fire, they hit what looked like weak points, only to discover that those outer shells were meant to break apart, releasing swarms of human attack drones that burst from the shattered rock like metal insects, flooding the defense grid, blinding sensors, cutting relay dishes, and forcing the fortress batteries to split their aim between the giant incoming masses and hundreds of smaller fast-moving threats. And by the time the system commanders realized they had been tricked into wasting their first volleys, it was too late, because the largest asteroid slammed through a shield segment already destabilized by repeated drone strikes, broke apart in a bloom of fire and debris, and sent a rain of armored fragments crashing into satellite clusters, docking spines, and defense nodes, turning Kalis' perfect orbital ring into a broken field of sparks and wreckage. From the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Admiral Day watched the battle through a calm haze of tactical overlays while Commander Jizu coordinated the second wave and Captain Hannah prepared the strike fleets hiding just beyond the Fortress System's outer scan wall. And when Kalis' central guns shifted toward the surviving asteroids, Day gave the order, and dozens of human ships surged out of shadow at once, not in a proud battle line but in scattered attack paths that seemed random until they hit all the weak points at the same moment, with corvettes darting through the broken satellite gaps, missile frigates hammering shield emitters, stealth destroyers cutting across the upper defense plane, and boarding pods launching toward isolated command platforms, because Kala Prime had never been built to survive an enemy who treated a fortress not as a wall to climb, but as a machine to disassemble. In the council chamber, High Marshal Varric still shouted that Kala would hold, that no fortress in 10,000 years had ever fallen to a single assault. But every new report made his voice sound smaller, because human strike teams were now inside the defense ring itself, sabotaging power relays, planting beacon scramblers, and forcing the station crews into blind local combat while the outer guns lost synchronization. And then the final insult came when a damaged ore hauler that the Kala controllers had ignored as drifting debris suddenly ignited hidden engines and rammed directly into the main shield harmonizer hub, exploding in a white core burst that collapsed half the ring's defensive coverage. And with that one hit, the unbreakable fortress of Kala Prime became an open wound in the Council's inner defenses. Across the galaxy, the news spread faster than the Council could censor it, because too many merchant ships, neutral observers, and civilian com-taps had already seen the feed, and for the first time in centuries ordinary citizens on distant worlds watched a Council fortress die not in glorious siege, but in confusion, sabotage, and relentless precision, while whispers began to move through neutral systems that perhaps the humans were not monsters at all, but the only ones strong enough to humble an empire that had grown arrogant behind old laws and old symbols. On Earth, memorials for Aelio's reach still burned in every major city, but the mood had changed from grief to iron certainty, and in underground command halls, factories, orbital platforms, and remote asteroid yards, humanity kept pushing deeper into total war with the cold efficiency of a species that had spent all of history preparing for disaster. While Una moved between political councils and fleet briefings, making sure no world broke under the pressure, and when some governors asked if Earth was going too far, she answered in the same steady voice that had once warned the Galactic Council that the humans had not attacked first, had not struck civilians first, and had not started this war, but they would finish it so completely that no one would ever dare repeat Aelio's reach. After Kala Prime, the Council tried to pull its scattered fleets back into strong defensive clusters around key infrastructure, but this only made the next phase of the human offensive even more deadly, because now Day no longer needed to chase fleets across empty space. He could target the things that kept them alive, and under his orders, human task groups launched coordinated strikes across 6 sectors at once, destroying fuel reserves hidden in moon caverns, collapsing jump gates with shaped reactor charges, crippling drone foundries by turning their own assembly lines into internal bombs, and wiping out command relays with rail strikes so accurate they cut station cores without flattening the civilian districts nearby. And that detail mattered, because even at their most ruthless, the humans were not burning worlds for revenge. They were cutting out the military organs of the Council with a precision that made the old powers feel even more helpless, since it proved Earth could destroy more and simply chose not to. Varric hated that more than anything, because terror could be answered with rage, but restraint made the humans look disciplined, and discipline made them dangerous in a way the Council had not prepared for. So he pushed harder, ordering harsher crackdowns, wider patrol sweeps, and emergency powers that allowed fleets to seize resources from neutral worlds. And that decision, made in anger, became another disaster, because several smaller species that had long feared the Council's heavy hand now began secretly helping Earth, passing route data, hiding damaged human ships, and feeding Nari's intelligence web with shipping records, fleet schedules, and access codes. And soon the humans were not just fighting a war against the Council. They were quietly becoming the center of a growing anti-Council shadow alliance. Aboard the Resolute Dawn, Nari presented the new intelligence with a rare look of satisfaction, explaining that more systems were opening silent corridors for human logistics, and Hannah added that Blackroot convoys were now moving through regions the Council thought were secure, which meant the next operation could begin earlier than planned. And when Jizu asked if they should reveal the reserve force, Day was silent for a moment before giving a single nod, because until then, humanity had been winning with adaptable fleets, converted industrial hulls, stealth ambushes, and hard doctrine. But there was one layer of Earth's war machine the galaxy had not yet seen, one force built in secret long before first contact, hidden in dark docks under treaties no alien had ever signed. And when the order went out, deep space listening posts across multiple sectors began picking up impossible signatures. Massive cold-running hulls with emission patterns unlike anything in the known Council registry. Ships so dark and so quiet that some sensors mistook them for missing stars. These were the Black Fleet, and when they emerged from shadow, even veteran human crews paused to watch, because the ships looked less like ordinary warships and more like deliberate nightmares, with long angular carriers built to release autonomous drone storms, siege cruisers carrying spinal rail lances large enough to split stations in one shot, stealth tenders cloaked in lead absorption plating, and command ships whose hull geometry broke up scans so badly they seemed to flicker in and out of existence. And the first time the Council saw them clearly was over the shattered remains of a major military academy moon, where one Black Fleet cruiser disabled the entire orbital defense shell in under 90 seconds, then carved the Academy's Central War Archive from the surface with surgical fire, taking the data and leaving the civilian sectors standing. Panic spread through the Council core worlds now, because if these hidden human ships existed, then everything they had believed about Earth's strength had been wrong. From the beginning, and Soreth, more exhausted and more haunted by the day, finally demanded to know why humanity had refused the war accord with such certainty, and an old analyst, pale and shaking as he reviewed First Contact archives, revealed the answer that should have terrified them years earlier. The humans had studied every Council war protocol in detail and concluded that the entire system was built on assumptions that only worked if all sides valued ritual over survival, that it protected the powerful by making war predictable, slow, and comfortable for those already on top, and that Earth, born from a history of brutal conflict, had seen immediately that such rules would fail the moment a desperate or ruthless enemy ignored them. In short, humanity had not rejected the accord out of ignorance, but because it understood war too well, Varric still refused to bend, and in one final act of pride he ordered the inner defense network around the Council capital to prepare for a last stand, calling every remaining ceremonial guard fleet, reserve dreadnought, and fortress satellite back toward the home systems, believing that if he could force the humans into the heart of the Empire, sheer mass and old prestige would finally break them. But Day had already planned for that too, because the purpose of the strikes, the fortress kills, the Black Fleet reveals, and the deep sabotage had never been only to win battles. It had been to strip the council down until its capital was naked beneath the symbols. One by one, human fleets punched through the weakened routes leading inward, not with reckless speed but with steady pressure, bypassing strong points, cutting reinforcements, and leaving behind broken logistics instead of glorious wreck fields, until at last the ancient homeworld of the Galactic Council, ringed by vast orbital stations and layered with defense halos that had not seen an enemy in 10,000 years, lit up with emergency alarms as unknown. Signatures appeared beyond the outer perimeter, then multiplied, then resolved into hundreds of human contacts spreading across the dark like a tightening net. And in the central chamber where so many species had once laughed at Ambassador Una, every face turned pale as the tactical display painted the impossible in bright red. Because Earth had not merely survived, it had come all the way to the throne of the galaxy. And as the first human ships entered range of the capital defense ring, a single encrypted transmission cut through the panic and opened on every command screen at once, showing Una standing beside Day on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, her expression calm, her voice cold, and behind her the silent shapes of the Black Fleet hanging in the stars like judgment. And she said only one line before the signal ended, a line that froze the chamber more completely than any threat could have done. This is your last chance to learn. The final hours of the war began in complete silence, a silence so deep that even the ancient defense stations around the Galactic Council's homeworld seemed to hold their breath. Because for the first time in 10,000 years enemy fleets had reached the capital ring, and not just any enemy, but the one species the Council had mocked as reckless, young, and uncivilized, and now across the dark between the stars, the human fleet spread out in layers so wide that it seemed less like an invasion and more like a tightening hand, with the Black Fleet hanging behind the forward assault groups like dark mountains, their cold hulls reflecting almost no light, while hundreds of smaller human ships drifted into attack vectors that made no sense to the old Council tacticians, because instead of charging the capital in a single glorious strike, Admiral Day had placed his forces in scattered arcs, broken clusters, and overlapping lanes that looked almost random. But Captain Hannah and Commander Jizu knew every ship was exactly where it needed to be, every corvette, missile frigate, rail sniper, boarding tender, drone carrier, and converted industrial warship locked into a plan that had been built not to win a battle for honor, but to tear apart the final illusion of control the Council still clung to. Inside the command chamber of the capital, High Marshal Varric stood in front of a wall of tactical light with his jaw clenched so hard it looked painful, while Councillor Terrell, Admiral Sorath, and dozens of pale-faced officers watched the human signals spread wider by the second. And Varric still believed that this last stand would save everything, because around the homeworld waited the full ceremonial guard fleets, ancient dreadnoughts plated in gold-black alloy, fortress satellites the size of cities, ring cannons built to crack moons, automated shield towers, and elite interceptor wings that had never once been tested in true war, only displayed in grand military parades, and he ordered them all to engage at maximum range, believing the humans would finally be forced into a direct assault against overwhelming firepower. But Day had already studied the defense ring for weeks through stolen archives, hidden probes, neutral shipping data, and live signal analysis fed by Nari's expanding intelligence web, and he knew that the Council capital was strongest where it expected to be attacked and weakest where no one had dared strike in 10 millennia. So instead of leading with massed fire, he began with blindness. At his command, waves of tiny dark drones launched from hidden bays across the human line, not hundreds but tens of thousands, so small many were nearly invisible, and they spread like dust through space, drifting, accelerating, vanishing into the glare of defense fire, until the capital's outer sensors suddenly filled with static, ghost returns, false fleet markers, and collapsing target locks, while at the same time rail slugs from extreme range sliced through 3 long-range tracking towers before the station crews even realized they were under real attack. And then the fortress satellites began firing at decoys, automated interceptors chased fake drive signatures, and half the defense grid turned its attention toward phantom fleets that did not exist. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Una stood beside Day once again, her face calm but her eyes fixed on the tactical map, because this was the end of the lesson she had tried to prevent from the beginning. And as Jizu reported that the first blind spots had opened, Hannah launched her fast assault groups through those gaps, sending corvettes and destroyers slashing into the capital ring from angles the Council doctrine had always considered tactically improper, cutting beneath gunplanes, rising through maintenance lanes, and skimming close to orbital structures where the big weapons could not fire safely without risking their own platforms, while human missile frigates stayed farther back and poured saturation volleys into exposed shield harmonizers, forcing the defense network to rotate power again and again until its timing began to break. The first major shock came when one of the Council's great ring cannons, proud symbol of its invincible capital, suddenly swung off target and fired into a friendly dreadnought formation, vaporizing 2 escorts and ripping open the flank of the massive battleship Crown of Order, because Nari's infiltration teams had spent days hiding signal worms inside archived command routines, and now, in the most important battle in Council history, its own guns no longer fully obeyed it, and panic surged through the chamber as officers shouted over one another, demanding manual control, backup channels, and hardline overrides. But every correction came too slowly, because human doctrine had never aimed to outshoot the entire defense ring at once, only to make it hesitate, misfire, and lose trust in itself. Varric screamed for the ceremonial guard fleets to push forward and crush the nearest human spearhead, and in a clean, beautiful formation the guard advanced, shields bright, hulls shining, battle standards lit like old legends, and for one brief moment the Council commanders felt hope, because the sight looked like the return of the old order itself. But Jizu had been waiting for exactly that, and instead of meeting them head-on, he pulled his visible ships back just enough to make the guard accelerate, drawing them deeper into a widening pocket where their own overlapping formations limited movement, and then hidden human strike craft burst from the shadow of disabled satellites and station wreckage all around them, attacking from within the very space the guard believed was secure, while drone swarms jammed targeting grids and rail snipers hammered command ships at long range, punching narrow holes through bridges, sensor crowns, and shield nodes, and in less than 6 minutes the proud ceremonial guard that had never truly fought a real enemy was reduced to spinning wrecks, burning hulks, and broken formations screaming for support. In the Council chamber, Sorath watched the destruction with hollow eyes and understood at last that the war had been lost long before the humans reached the capital. Because every battle, every ambush, every broken convoy, every fallen fortress, every revealed Black Fleet hull had only been a step in a deeper design, and that design was not merely to defeat the Council, but to show every species watching that the old Empire's rules had never made war civilized, only comfortable for those already in power. Then came the final attempt to save the capital, when Varric ordered the activation of the Central Defense Ring and personally boarded the Command Dreadnought Eternal Mandate, a massive flagship surrounded by fortress escorts and linked directly into the homeworld's shield core, believing that if he could hold the center long enough, the humans would be forced into a direct attack he could finally understand. But Day did not attack the center first, because he knew the Eternal Mandate was strongest when connected to the full ring, so he did what humans had done since Aelio's reach. He cut the nerves before striking the heart. Black Fleet siege cruisers moved into firing lanes and used focus spinal rails to sever power transfer towers between orbital segments, while stealth tenders released boarding teams onto shield relay hubs, and Hannah's assault wings blasted open maintenance corridors to let Marines storm into isolated platforms, where brutal close fighting erupted. In dark tunnels and flashing control rooms, and within minutes the once unified capital ring became a chain of separated islands, each one strong alone but useless together. While down on the homeworld below, millions watched the battle in terror through censored feeds that could no longer be fully hidden, seeing the ancient stations above them flicker, fail, and go dark one by one like dying stars. Then Day gave the order for the last push, and the resolute Dawn surged forward with Jizz's remaining destroyers and Hannah's hardest strike groups, not toward the planet, but toward the Eternal Mandate itself, and Varric, furious and desperate, finally got the battle he wanted, with the great dreadnought turning broadside, its guns blazing, escorts collapsing inward around it, the void between fleets erupting in missiles, shattered armor, and blue-white fire. But even now the humans did not fight like the Council expected, because unmanned decoy frigates rushed ahead broadcasting human command signatures, forcing the dreadnought to waste its heaviest guns, while stealth boats slid under its shield arcs to attach breaching charges, and rail strikes from hidden support ships punched the escort screen apart at the edges, opening just enough room for the resolute Dawn to angle in close, trading armor for position, taking hits along its flank, losing entire outer sections, and still pushing forward with relentless purpose. Aboard the Eternal Mandate, Varric finally saw the human flagship with his own eyes through shattered tactical overlays, a dark, scarred warship driving straight through fire as if pain itself meant nothing, and when he demanded an open channel, Yuna's face appeared beside Day's, calm as ever, and Varric spat that humans were barbarians, pirates, animals who had poisoned the meaning of honorable war, but Day answered in the same steady voice that had haunted the galaxy since the first strike, telling him that the Council had built rules to make war comfortable, predictable, and safe for those who thought they would never lose, and that Earth had been born on a world where war was never comfortable, never clean, and never safe. And then he ended the channel and gave the order that broke the last symbol of the old empire. From multiple angles, human breaching teams detonated charges on the Eternal Mandate's shield relays. Hannah's bombers slammed concentrated torpedoes into the exposed gaps, and the Resolute Dawn fired its forward spinal cannon directly into the Dreadnought's command spine, splitting armor, shredding decks, and knocking out the central control lattice, while at the same moment Nari's signal teams forced the crippled ship to broadcast on every major frequency in the system. So when Varric's flagship died, it died in full view of the entire galaxy, its final burning break visible not as a hidden tactical loss, but as a public end to the illusion that the Council could never fall. After the Eternal Mandate was broken, the remaining capital defenses began collapsing fast, some surrendering, some going dark, some still fighting out of fear. But the humans did not turn their guns on the planet below, and that choice changed everything, because every species watching knew the Black Fleet had the power to shatter cities, ignite oceans, or burn continents if ordered, yet Day refused, and instead human boarding forces seized the command citadel in orbit, forced the surviving Council leaders into emergency chambers, and compelled a system-wide surrender broadcast that echoed across every known channel, with Yuna standing before the symbols of the same chamber where she had once been laughed at, announcing that the Galactic Council would live, but not as it had before, that its fleets would stand down, its war laws would be rewritten, and every species in the galaxy would now know a truth the old powers had hidden for too long, that rules meant nothing if they protected cruelty and punished survival. Soreth, standing among the defeated officers, lowered his head not in shame alone but in bitter understanding, because he realized the humans had not conquered the galaxy to rule it. They had broken it open so it could no longer pretend. In the days that followed, the surrender spread across system after system. Council fleets laid down arms, fortress stations powered down, and worlds that had lived under fear began speaking openly for the first time in generations, while Earth did not claim the capital or crown itself emperor, instead forcing the creation of new laws. No civilian colony could ever again be targeted without united response. No war protocol could protect first strikes behind legal language, and no species could hide aggression inside ceremony and call it civilization. And throughout the stars a new phrase began to spread in military schools, political halls, trade ports, and frightened whispers among old admirals. A phrase spoken with fear, respect, and something close to or human war rules, and it did not mean fairness, it did not mean cruelty, and it did not mean chaos. It meant adaptability, total readiness, ruthless precision, and the terrifying promise that if pushed too far, humanity would do whatever survival demanded. Back on Earth, memorial lights still burned for Aelio's reach, because no victory could bring back the dead. But the names of those lost were no longer spoken with helpless grief alone. They were spoken as the first names. In the lesson that changed the galaxy forever, and as the battered Resolute Dawn drifted above the silent capital ring, scarred but unbroken,